leading opposition figure, Mehdi Karabi, has been shot for breaking the curfew recently put into place in Iran. Family members report that Taghi Karabi left his home Sunday night, about 30 minutes after the curfew was put into place, and did not return during the night. The next morning, his body was found by the Revolutionary Guard, and Karabi was told of his son's death. The Iranian government confirms that Taghi Karabi was shot by local police after breaking curfew. A government spokesperson stated that Karabi was part of a group of demonstrators disturbing the peace. The government claims that the group clashed with police sent to subdue them, and that Karabi was shot during the fighting. His family countered that Karabi was unarmed and was going out to visit his ailing grandmother. His father said guards assigned to his family by Iranian police have stopped providing security for him. Traditionally, police have for years provided security to opposition figures. Mehdi Karabi has harshly criticized the government, saying, "The authorities have overstepped the line of reason. Citizens fear leaving their homes. My son is the latest casualty of the excesses of this regime." Leading opposition leaders arrived at the Karabi family home to offer their condolences. A funeral is planned for early next week. It is expected to become a focal point for protest against recent government crackdown. The government has warned the population not to protest at the funeral. In other news, fighting has intensified in Pakistan in the Swat Valley. More on this after the break, followed by new reports on the worsening refugee situation in Côte d'Ivoire.
In the most recent update of the situation in Pakistan, dozens of refugee camps outside of Peshawar have sprung up since last May, when over 1.9 million Pakistanis fled the fighting in Swat to reach safety. An additional 500,000 persons fled the area when fighting broke out last year, resulting in a total of 2.4 million internally displaced persons. We now go to correspondent in Pakistan, Imran Khan. Imran, what's your take on the situation in the Yar Hussein refugee camp?
The administration block, which is...
A guided tour reveals limited progress. This camp is phase 1, designated emergency supplies only. It can take 10,000 people. So far it's home to 4,000, but more are on the way. This man fled from the fighting in Bunair. He says he hopes that the man from the United Nations can help him.
We want the UN to restore peace to the area. We are getting facilities here, but we want to go home. There's nowhere like home. I hope the UN can help us.
Even putting up tents represents a huge logistical challenge, especially in Pakistan's summer temperatures. And healthcare and basic hygiene are priority concerns. As well as the obvious logistical problems this camp faces, it does have another issue, and that's one of a medical nature. We've already seen cases here reported of diarrhea and of skin diseases. Now, if they spread, that's a disaster. What this camp needs is an influx of medical equipment and of skilled medical workers. It has some of that, but not nearly enough. In comparison to some other camps, Yar Hussein is for the moment well ordered and well run. More than 1 million people are on the move, displaced by the ongoing fierce fighting between Pakistan Armed Forces and the Taliban. There are real fears, though, that temporary housing for the internal refugees may become permanent. In the northwest frontier, people still remember the 5 million Afghan refugees who poured across the border fleeing Russian occupation of their country. They turned their tents into bricks and mortar huts, and they stayed for 10 years. These people want to return home long before that, anxious that they and their children stay here as short a time as possible.
Welcome back. In other related news, U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates visited Pakistani Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani in order to amend an increasing trust deficit that has emerged in U.S.-Pakistani relations. Gates, on the first day of his visit, urged government officials to build their offensives against militants, as he tried to reassure a skeptical Pakistani public about U.S. aims in the region. Gates' trip is designed to try to improve the Pakistani public's view of the United States, which has been battered in recent years by controversies over the American drone strikes near the border with Afghanistan, and a feeling that Pakistan has been pushed around by its superpower ally in fighting Islamist militancy. Pakistan and the United States have long had a problematic relationship, but at no time in recent memory has the level of anti-Americanism appeared as high. A survey in August by the Pew Research Center in Washington showed that 64% of Pakistanis viewed the US as an enemy, and the poll released in October by the University of Maryland found that 90% of Pakistani respondents thought the US abused its power. Fueled by quarrels over both US military and economic assistance efforts, the anger was rippling through the Pakistani news media and undercutting diplomatic relations. America is experiencing its most contested hour, said Nadeem Farooq Parasha, a Dawn newspaper columnist.
In a nation already overrun with civil unrest, political coups, and controversial leaders, it's not surprising to know that yet another scandal has surfaced in the West African nation of Côte d'Ivoire. But this time, it isn't the locals who are stirring up trouble. BBC News has recently uncovered the shocking story of a UN peacekeeper and what's really going on in the de facto capital of Abidjan. Several UN peacekeepers, part of the UNOCI peacekeeping mission in Côte d'Ivoire, have been accused of buying sex from underage girls, despite the mission's mandate to promote human rights and protect children from violence. Desperate to earn money for their families, some girls as young as 9 years old work in the sex industry in Côte d'Ivoire's main economic area of Abidjan. Often, these children are from rural areas and leave their families for Abidjan, lured by the promises of work. The girls are hired to work in restaurants, but instead of serving food, customers solicit them for sex. Far from their families, these girls see no other way to live. The fact that the country has been suffering economically since 2002 means that the sex trade of children is not limited to large population centers such as Abidjan, but is also spreading to smaller towns such as Odiné, where girls as young as 9 to 13 years old are exchanging sex for money. The UN has not yet released the names of the peacekeepers involved or their nationalities, but BBC does know that there are at least 3 high-ranking officials implicated in the scandal. The story, which broke when mission headquarters received an anonymous envelope of explicit photos and a letter detailing the transactions, has been kept relatively quiet until recently, when a disgruntled office worker met with a local news anchor to spill all. BBC will update you as the situation unfolds.
I'm reporting from Blue Mosque in Tabriz, where just hours ago, government forces opened fire on a large-scale protest, with early estimates pointing to at least 50 civilian deaths. Sources tied to the Iranian government put their estimates at under 20 civilian casualties, and 5 casualties on the side of the military. In an ironic twist, the protesters were rallying against the treatment of post-election protesters, against the contentious results of the Iranian presidential election last summer, when 4 candidates ran against the incumbent Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and ex-premier Mir Hossein Mousavi coming out in front in a closely contested election. After Mr. Ahmadinejad claimed victory with 62.2% of the vote, protests erupted due to allegations of fraud. The campaign period has indicated a close race between Ahmadinejad and Mousavi, whereas the results showed Mousavi finishing second with just under 34%. This is inconsistent with many pre-election polls where Mousavi actually held a lead over Ahmadinejad. There were numerous accounts of seemingly blatant fraud, including voter turnout level in certain cities above 100%. However, this could be potentially explained by a technicality in Iranian electoral system, which allows voters registered in a city to cast their votes elsewhere, causing similarly abnormal turnouts in past elections. Nonetheless, large-scale protests erupted in all major Iranian cities, reminiscent of the 1979 protests which installed the current Islamic regime. After brief consideration of the protesters' claims, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, endorsed Ahmadinejad's victory on June 19, 2009, and refused to allow a partial recount. The following weekend, Iranians ignored the supreme leader's orders not to march, and turned out in numbers not seen since the 1979 revolution. By Sunday, 19 individuals have been killed, compared to the government claim of 10, and in the hit-and-run battles between Green Wave protesters and the pro-regime Basiji vigilantes, the government arrested hundreds, perhaps thousands. Evidently, Iran's people are still angry about the results of last summer's election. Today's protest could be seen as their attempt to garner further international attention to their cause, and as the death toll rises, it most certainly will. Initially, tear gas was used to try to control the mob, but when civilians began to throw Molotov cocktails, the drastic decision to shoot was made. It is unclear where the command came from. Identified as victims of the crossfire were a cousin-in-law and her 5-year-old daughter Ahmadinejad's, with the former dead and the latter in critical condition.
Oh, good